Thank you, chairpersons, and I thank the organizers firstly for giving us this opportunity to talk in front of you today. As you know, we are from Dharamshila Narayana Hospital, and I will be talking on behalf of our department, which is BMT and Hematology, which is run by myself and Dr. Sarita Jaswal. Now, the first thing that I would like to highlight over here, can we have a laser pointer? When we talk of cancer, we talk of solid tumors. Now what you see over here is a classical demonstration of how solid tumors are graded. Let's take an example of breast cancer. Now breast cancer, you look at the tumor size, you see where the tumor has spread in terms of the lymph nodes, and if it is spread more distant than that, you call it metastasis, and it's staged according to stage 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when you go to stage 4, where the disease has spread across the body, you don't have any survival at all at 5 years. So that's by and large the story of a solid tumor, that you have to be able to cut it out at the root, and then give adjoining therapies like chemotherapy, radiation. Chemotherapy alone does not cure it, largely. But when we come to blood cancers, or liquid tumors as it is often called nowadays, it is by definition, by nature, it is stage 4. If you take the paradigm of solid tumor, that is, it's spread everywhere. Your blood is running from head to toe. Bone marrow is an omnipresent organ. Like you'll hear Dr. Nikhil or Dr. Vikas talk about renal or gastro. You can visualize an organ, but can you visualize bone marrow as an organ? You cannot. So that's the mystique and that's the exoticness of the whole story. That it's present in every sinew of our body. So it is stage 4. Now you take the example of breast cancer stage 4, I showed you, the survival is nearly 0 at 4 years. So take the example of acute lymphoblastic leukemia in childhood. The current survival is 90% at 5 years. So what is the difference? And the difference lies in the fact that no amount of chemotherapy or radiotherapy can kill the last tumor cell. That is the basic principle of oncology. That you can blast the human body with any amount of drugs or radiation you want, but the last cancer cell remains. Or let's say in other words, that you have 10 to the power 12 tumor cells when a patient of acute leukemia first presents. And when you say the patient is in remission, you still have 1 million leukemia cells in the body. So what takes care of it? I mean, when you say that chemotherapy has cured it, no. Sorry, chemotherapy has only reduced it. What has taken care of it is the body's own immune system. Now, if the body has a competent immune system at the end of chemotherapy to take care of the residual leukemic cells, the leukemia will go and stay in remission. But if that is not achievable, means the disease comes back. What do? You have two options. You either re-educate the immune system or you introduce a new immune system. What is re-education of the immune system? Where does the immune system come from? They come from the bone marrow stem cells. Now you take the bone marrow stem cells and you freeze them. You give high dose of chemotherapy to get rid of the tumor, whatever is left, as little as possible, and then you give back these cells. That's called an autologous transplantation. But that often does not work. It does not work where bone marrow is involved. So you give cells from a donor. Now this is called an allogenic transplantation. And allogenic transplantation was tried for last 100 years. The initial period people used to feed bone marrow to patients. The concept was there that you have an unhealthy bone marrow, give a healthy bone marrow. But obviously that didn't work, and 200 transplants were tried in the period between 1920 and 1960. But none of them succeeded. Until this gentleman came and revolutionized the concept of bone marrow or hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, Professor Donald Thomas, who is the only physician, clinician to have ever received a Nobel Prize. He received it in 1990, and he passed away a few years later, witnessing 1 million bone marrow transplantations in his lifetime. I'm not going into the details of his work because of lack of time, but the whole crux of the matter is hematopoietic stem cells. Now, no other organ carries the stem cells along with the organ. You know, again, I cannot get into the details of the hoax fraud that's going on with stem cell therapy in the country now. But it's best to know that the only organ that can provide stem cells are the hematopoietic stem cells. Stem cells are characterized by the capacity to renew itself, to proliferate, and to differentiate. Now, no other organ has got that capacity apart from the GI tract to a certain extent. So saying that, where do we get these cells from? You know, the most intuitive source is the bone marrow. You take it directly from the bone marrow. But in the last 20-25 years, we have developed a technique by which we stimulate the bone marrow to release these cells in the bloodstream, and they're collected by a machine called apheresis machine. These cells are concentrated, collected. They are called peripheral blood stem cells. And we also know that there is a very rich source of stem cells in very tiny amount of cord blood. That when the mother and the baby are separated out, the cord blood has got very high concentration of stem cells. So these are the three major sources of hematopoietic stem cells that we know. But when we talk of transplant, people think that it's a surgical procedure. And the major thing that one has to understand, as far as hematopoietic stem cell transplantation is concerned, that in renal transplantation, which Dr. Vikas will talk about, the basic premises are based on that the organ expresses high amount of ABO antigens. So ABO blood grouping has to be matched. That can be overcome nowadays. But in bone marrow, it is the HLA which has to be matched. And HLA is a signature in human body. So that matching is possible randomly in only 1 in a million. So you cannot just get a donor off the street, and that's why the bone marrow transplantation does not really need to be regulated as a solid organ transplant. And bone marrow is an ever replenishing organ, and it can fill itself repeatedly. So a donor can donate several times, which is not possible with a solid organ transplant. So what is BMT? BMT is basically giving high dose of chemotherapy or radiotherapy to empty out the existing bone marrow, which is diseased or defective, and give the cells. And the main thing in bone marrow transplantation is taking not just care of rejection, but because it's an immunocompetent organ that you're giving, there is a risk of a reaction the other way, which is called the graft versus host disease. And graft versus host disease is a major problem in bone marrow transplantation, unlike solid organ transplants. And the only surgical procedure involved is a Hickman line insertion, which we do for the ease of administering drugs and blood products. So once we give the cells, it's not, as I told you, it's not a surgical procedure, we just simply infuse it through the veins. So where do these cells go? These cells go to the bone marrow. How do they go? It's like a lost cat, it finds its way to the home. Because of certain receptors and certain ligands present in the bone marrow, they are automatically home to the bone marrow. And you'll be surprised to find that only 2% of the cells you infuse actually reach the bone marrow. And that's enough to repopulate a bone marrow and have a normal function. But what happens after the high-dose chemotherapy or radiotherapy is that you are left with an empty bone marrow. It's not like a solid organ transplant where you put the organ and the organ will start functioning in the very near future, in a few days. This takes weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and this 2 to 3 weeks are critical because the body does not have an immune system, the body does not have any hematopoietic cells. So they have to be harbored or nursed in a very special place called the bone marrow transplant unit, which is possibly like a space suit, where the patients are kept trying to prevent infections of all sorts. And this is the period where it's like a tightrope walking. A single mistake might cause the patient his or her life. So I've already talked about the graft versus host disease, and because of lack of time, I have to be quick. Now, one of the purposes of this talk over here is to talk about what we do. And what we do is half-matched or haploidentical transplantation primarily. Bone marrow transplantation is based on matching of HLA, complete matching of HLA. When we started doing these transplants, the rest of the world was embarking on what is called an unrelated donor transplantation. And unrelated donor transplantation for an Indian population is a far-fetched dream, because the chances of finding a matched donor from an unrelated registry because of a genetic diversity is very low. And if you take a mismatched unrelated donor, the chances of survival decrease with each mismatch. So this was very much an far-fetched thing for our population. So we looked at what nature has given us. So when we are born with one pair of HLA from each parent, and they are half-matched or haploidentical with us. And the same is true for our children, and the same is true for 90% of our siblings if we do not find a full-matched donor in the family. And our body is naturally tutored to reject anything foreign. So when a mother bears a child in the womb for 9 months, what we are faced with is a situation where the mother has to stay with a foreign HLA antigen. And rejection often happens in abortion. But 99% of the pregnancies are successful. And that is the biggest example of natural tolerance which nature has given us. That is, a mother and a child are naturally tolerant to each other. So haploidentical transplantation was not thought of today or yesterday. People have tried it for a long time. They have not succeeded until this gentleman who you're seeing in your picture over here, marked in red, Professor Chakrabarty, who's a very good friend and mentor of mine, and under whom Dr. Sarita trained in Italy, originated half-match transplant. And half-match transplant has moved, haploidentical transplant has moved in the recent times. And we embarked on this journey as long back as in 2010 in association with Professor Paul O'Donnell from Seattle. It's not that something we picked up from thin air and started doing, just like that. It was a very well-planned controlled trial. In our first 10 patients we did, there was a proof of principle. They were all end-stage leukemia. We succeeded partly. None of the patients had any complications, but the patients relapsed because of the nature of the disease. So we changed our protocol, and the outcome improved to around 40% survival. Now what I will show you over here is that for this group of patients, the survival of 20% is supposed to be good enough. So we should have been happy with 40%. But we were not. We changed our protocol further. And what you see over here is that this is the current survival of this very high group patients that we have of 70%. And this has actually changed the perception of the world. That this study was presented by Dr. Sarita way back in 2016. It has been published and it's widely cited now. So this was largely our work in malignant diseases. Now we have taken this a lot further, and I will, because of brevity of time, not go into the details, but show you that on the right-hand side, this is our current survival of the 44 patients who have had various forms of immunotherapy-based transplantation. a survival of 70%, which is possibly the best the world has seen up to now. And again, I will not get into this any further because, as I said, of lack of time. And I will just show you that this is the current data that we have in terms of our half-match transplantation. As I said, we predominantly do haploidentical or half-match transplantation. We are known worldwide for this only. We do match transplantation of various sorts. That's not that we don't do, but our main focus is on this. And out of the 80 allogeneic transplantations we have done, 75 has been half-matched or haploidentical transplantation. Now, the non-relapse mortality or dying because of complications of transplantation in this group of patients countrywide is about 50%. Internationally, it's anywhere between 30 to 40%. Our non-relapse mortality is in the range of 15%, and the overall survival is 80%. So this has not been just achieved, by a very casual approach. It is a very measured and a well-researched approach that we have taken. We have our own BMT lab where we do our basic research, and we have improved on our protocols over a period of time. And as you see over here, that 4 consecutive years from 2015, 16, 17, and 18, Dr. Sarita has been presenting at the BMT tandem meeting in USA, oral presentation of her studies, which means that people have taken cognizance of our work. And in fact, it is only yesterday that we received the message from European Bone Marrow Transplantation Organization that they want to do a film on our work and showcase it in the next meeting in 2018. So for all these achievements, I actually thank Dr. Sarita and our entire BMT team, our nurses and everyone, that I'm able to talk in front of you today with all this work and all these results. Thank you so much.